Ma'am has touched upon some very important topics on 147 and I'll just quickly take it forward from there. So talking about information. Information to suggest has been a very crucial change. The very fact that we have moved from reasons to believe to information to suggest has been a big change in the entire regime. The question now exists is that what exactly do we mean by information to suggest? Does the bar and the threshold which was laid down in the old regime, does it still continue to exist? The basic principle is that income chargeable to tax should have escaped assessment. So whether we talk about reasons to believe or we talk about information to suggest, the threshold states that you need to have some concrete evidence, material, information of some level so as to be able to say that I'm sending you a notice because I have a prima facie view that information shows that your income chargeable to tax has escaped assessment. So the threshold still remains the same, that your income chargeable to tax has escaped assessment. One of the arguments which was raised by the revenue in one of the matters was that now the very fact that we have done away with reasons to believe itself shows that the assumption of jurisdiction can now be taken the moment we have information, and the threshold that income chargeable to tax also no longer exists. This is an argument which has been explicitly rejected by one of the high courts, where they say that at the stage of assumption of jurisdiction, the initial burden of the revenue is a statutory burden which still says that no notice shall be issued, and the proviso uses the word no notice shall be issued. So it is still mandatory and incumbent upon the assessing officer to be able to prove that income chargeable to tax has escaped assessment. So even if we refer to reasons to believe under the earlier regime, or we talk about information to suggest under the new regime, the basic threshold remains the same, that you need to be able to substantiate to a certain level, because these are only the initiation of proceedings. So one can say that I do not have conclusive proof, but you need to have information and material of a certain credible level so as to be able to issue a notice under 148. So the basic threshold even under the new law today remains the same. And there have been 2-3 judgments on this aspect. Delhi High Court has also stated, it says that whether information to suggest under the new law or the reasons to believe under the old regime, the basic threshold remains the same. The primary condition to be satisfied even today is the same threshold. That the very fact that there's already a material on record, that cannot amount to information. Information has to be information gathered from other sources, because that can again amount to change of opinion, as ma'am was discussing, or a re-look or a re-examination. I've taken a position in my return, I've claimed certain exemption deductions. This is already a fact or material on record. This cannot be information to suggest. Information to suggest has to be something coming from an external source so as to substantiate that yes, this deduction or exemption taken by you under your return is incorrect for XYZ reasons, which was not coming from the return itself. So a fact or material already on record cannot constitute information. This is what this judgment has stated. And the basic threshold of income chargeable to tax having escaped assessment is important, so as to show that there is been loss to the revenue, which is why a reopening should be permitted in the facts of a given scenario. To talk about the information, I think the CBDT guideline really helps us to this extent. The department has themselves recognized that before initiating notices, the department should verify before drawing any adverse inference. And then they mention in the third line, it is not out of place to mention that the information made available, uploaded by the reporting entities may not be fully accurate. So this is important because this is a case where they are accepting that sometimes certain kind of raw data comes in, and that raw data requires further investigation and verification at the end of the assessing officer before assuming jurisdiction. Because many a time we would notice, and I'm sure some of us have faced it practically also, that raw data is a good starting point probably, and then their judgment that they recognize that may be a good point to issue 148A, which is conduct an inquiry, or at max 148AB, that is issue a notice. But subject to my response, which is why 148C becomes very important, which is considered, there are situations where we have also seen that the proceedings get dropped, because that information turns out to be not fully accurate, or that information turns out to be not reliable enough so as to assume jurisdiction correctly under the law. So this is an important aspect that we see. The second bullet point is also important because they say that the supervisory authorities are hereby advised to keep an effective supervision. So this is where section 151 also kicks in, and the powers of the PCIT and CCIT become very important while assuming jurisdiction, which is why taking their approval becomes very important in law. So now this information has to be of certain credible level, and the information itself cannot allow us to do certain kind of roving and fishing inquiries. A matter had come in before Delhi High Court, and Mr. Gulati sir is here, sir was also part of this batch, Angelina Tony. So what happened in this case was that certain foreign entities had made capital account transactions. There was just capital infusion during the year under consideration. So let's say they had purchased 100 shares of their subsidiary companies or some other companies. And notices were sent to them. So these were challenging writ petitions, and what the court noticed was that they have no information. They have just sent this to do roving and fishing inquiries for the purposes of verification, and they are using this as a point to take information from us. So they send a notice, they say that this is a capital account transaction, they accept that this is a capital account transaction. So the basic threshold of law, that income chargeable to taxes escaped assessment, is not being fulfilled. Yet they will ask for your bank account statements, they will ask for all documents to be submitted, which otherwise these foreign entities in law are not entitled to file, because these foreign entities are not filing the income tax returns. This is not a case where there's a permanent establishment or there's a royalty and they are otherwise chargeable to tax. There have been no transactions at all. So the court goes on the basic premise, and the court says that these are capital account transactions. So the basic concept of income chargeable to tax has not escaped assessment. So the basic threshold is not fulfilled. Now sending any kind of further notices will amount to roving and fishing inquiries and gathering information from us in turn, which is not permitted in law. So there have been instances even under the new regime where we have seen where the courts have accepted that issuing notices to further collect information from me or for the purposes of verification should not be permitted. This is a rather long judgment, but this is a very important judgment of Karnataka High Court, one of the best judgments that we have had on the new regime. So this is one good recommendation and a good reading point to start with to understand. Court understands and discusses what is information. They rely on certain old precedents. They accept that a re-look at the same material which was already on record cannot amount to information. A fact which has already been on record will not be reconsidered under the garb of information. But I think these paragraphs are a little important. I would not read them, but again an argument raised by the department in this case was that because we have done away with reasons to believe, now at this stage we don't need any reasons at all. So we have information and we will just use that information. The court has completely rejected that. In fact, the court goes a step further and the court says earlier regime had an element of subjectivity. So because when we refer to reasons to believe, there is no fixed format of how to gather your reasons to believe, so there is a certain element of subjectivity. The court says that that has been done away with and now it's an objective exercise. So you need to have concrete evidence and material to show that yes, income has escaped assessment, which is why I am sending you a notice. So in fact, this judgment goes a step higher and the judgment says that information to suggest is not a lower threshold. It is in fact a higher threshold under the old, if we compare it with the old law. Because now you need to show that there is an X information, which then there is a live link, the word that we used to use under the old law. So that X information creates a live link with your return to show that yes, income has escaped assessment. So this judgment in that way really helps us. And the various arguments raised by the revenue and this with respect to understanding information to suggest has been rejected by this, by the court in this
Excuse me. Nowadays, cash deposits in banks without having our bank account with the assessing officer, simply getting the information from AIB or AAR
yes.
or AAC, CIB, some code number 004 and code number 003, just entering in the total deposits of so and so, I have escaped assessment. The notices were given like that.
Yes, yes.
And when we have found that there is no bank account at all with the assessing officer.
That was already covered by madam.
Yes.
Earlier you have covered. Earlier madam has covered.
Yes.
After the allowance.
Okay.
Yes. What sir has mentioned is completely correct to that extent. Then the judgment goes on to discuss further, and a very important fact is the judgment says is that the fact that you're picking up something from my return, that shows that you have missed the bus of original 143.3 assessment and now you want to use it under 147, which is not permitted. So the court goes on to say that based on the return, it was open to the assessing officer to undertake a regular assessment, which he would have done if he felt at that stage that a wrong claim has been taken. To permit the assessing officer to state that the income has escaped assessment and reopen the same based on the same return, which has already disclosed the transaction under dispute, would enable them to bypass the regular assessment procedure, and that would virtually render 147 an enabling provision so as to make a second assessment. So as to forget the fact that these are reassessment proceedings, but just give them an extension of the assessment proceedings, which is not permitted in law. So to that extent, the court has kind of laid down the entire process and procedure of reopening under the new regime and given it a very important interpretation from a very practical perspective. So the court out here accepts that 147 proceedings are not for my regular assessment. They are not giving a power so as to do a de novo assessment once again, and hence it is only concrete information which shows and relates to my escapement, that needs to be proved. An important aspect out here is also whether information and material should be supplied to me or not. So we all aware that reports come in from DDI, investigation wing, reports will come in from SEBI. So the entire report needs to be submitted to me or not. Many a times we know that then the internal reports created by the income tax department bases the report that comes from an external agency, whether those reports are to be provided and shared with me or not. While we have several judgments, and we had some judgments under the old law as well, which said that yes, the information material evidence should be provided. There's however been a judgment of Madhya Pradesh High Court which has taken a negative view. Now the Madhya Pradesh High Court just goes by the literal interpretation of 148A(b), and it says that it does not oblige the assessing officer to supply the relevant material. They discuss the favourable judgments of Delhi High Court, Bombay High Court, other high courts, and yet they say that the very fact that tax laws always allow us to only look at the section as it exists, which is literal interpretation, strict interpretation, and there's no scope for reading words into it. So if 148A(b) does not state that evidence and the back material forming the basis why we have sent a notice should also be supplied, then it is not to be supplied. Now, of course, this is an important point which can help us understand this a little further. First, we can understand that and I think all of us will agree on this aspect, that no prejudice is being caused to the revenue if they share that information with us. Rather, some transparency will be ensured, and of course, they can remove third-party data. Whatever is the secrecy to that extent can be maintained, and they can give us the information and the material which is related to the assessee in specific. Principles of natural justice also say that an evidence gathered behind my back cannot be used against me to take an adverse inference, and it is better to confront it to the assessee. Many a time we have seen practically when 133 notices are sent and information is gathered behind our backs and they are not confronted to us. Even in regular assessments, we take that process that 133 notices were not confronted to us. Statements recorded have not been confronted to us. So to that extent, the principle of law remains the same, that if you are gathering something and using it to draw an adverse inference, why not confront it to the assessee? And many a time there will be practical scenarios when if that is confronted to me, I can explain it, I can justify it, I can explain that if X happened, then it happened for Y, Z, A, B reasons. So unless and until I'm not supplied that what is the back thinking thought process, and I'm just given a small paragraph as information, I may not be able to substantiate my reply. So providing and giving that information will only help take forward the assessment, the reassessment rather, in a more collaborative manner. But however, we have seen that there is one judgment which has taken this view. Change of opinion, ma'am has already discussed, so I will not get into that. This is again a topic ma'am spoke about, the journey from 148A(b) to 148A(d). I've called it the change of goalpost because this is something we've quite often seen, that 148B notices are coming on a different aspect and 148A(d) orders are being passed on a different aspect. Under the old law also we have seen that the reasons recorded cannot be supplemented, they cannot be elaborated upon at a later stage. So if the reasons recorded are 148A(b), then you have to stick to 148A(b), because again basic principle says that information was available with you qua X transaction, you confronted it to me, you saw my reply, and then suddenly you remember there's Y, Z, A, B, C also. So why not give me all of them together? So there's no bar in the law that 148A(b) has to be issued only on one issue. If you have 5 issues which are of certain concern, why don't you confront all 5 together? So that becomes very important to understand, and there have been judgments on this aspect as well. So if I talk about Chhattisgarh High Court, a transaction which was put to the assessee was amounting to 36 lakh rupees. So the assessee took the benefit of less than 50 lakhs and raised the jurisdictional appeal. The assessing officer passed an order where he put forward another 14 lakhs so as to jump to 50 lakhs plus. The assessee challenged it in Chhattisgarh High Court. I think it was a single judge judgment, single bench. And the court said that 14 lakh information was available with you. But still you did not confront it to the assessee at the 148A(b) stage. And the court allowed the writ petition. So these are certain important aspects where change of goalpost is actually a practical difficulty which we all are seeing in our day-to-day notices that we are receiving. Again, this is a smaller aspect of principles of natural justice where it says less than 7 days, minimum of not less than 7 days to be given. I think this is a point to be urged when you actually feel that yes, if I was given more time, I could have taken a confirmation from the other party so as to improve my case, because this at most would amount to an irregularity and not an illegality, But this is a point worth raising definitely if you feel that yes, that extra time would have been of some help to you. And also there's Bombay High Court which says that weekends are to be excluded. So effectively if you are going to get about 10-12 days, then yes, this is a point being taken when you can say that certain information was either archived or it was kept in a different place, and due to paucity of time I could not collect the information. And many times you all practically face this problem that these notices come in the month of March, where we are busy and because of other timelines, and we are busy because of our regular time barring assessments. The Holy Week is going on, many of us have seen those problems, and then we get notices on the Holy Weekend for just a couple of days, 2-3 days. So yes, that is when urging this so as to substantiate violation of natural justice becomes important.
This time limit is applicable in the second notice.
148(b), sir.
Second notice के अंदर minimum 7 days time limit is still applicable.
Plus, yes. So explanation 2 to 148, this is the topic again ma'am spoke about, very relevant topic, because now we all know 153A, 153C regime has been completely done away with, and all of it forms part of the 148 regime now. So to understand, the court has put, the legislature has put searched and non-searched persons in the same basket. If you see, I've highlighted some points. So the first says that as soon as search is initiated, they will fall within the realm of explanation 2. But for clauses 3 and 4, and I've highlighted it with red, so as to show that probably even today there is a distinction between the search and the non-search entities. The assessing officer is satisfied. Now the word satisfied is missing in the first two, with the prior approval. So 151 comes in here where the approval becomes very important, which is also missing in the first two. So as soon as there's a search on somebody, the deeming provision of explanation 2 automatically kicks in, but probably they still create a distinction between the non-search, which was the other party, or the 153C party that we used to refer to. So assessing officer is satisfied with prior approval. So the word satisfied today shows that they have to apply their mind. So recording of a satisfaction note under the old regime of 153C can be said to be still applicable, so as to show that yes, they have information material which is of some incriminating nature, so as to substantiate application of a deeming provision. This provision definitely, one can say that is putting the searched and the non-searched person under the same basket, because effectively the deeming provision is being applied and the explanation 2 kicks in for the search and the non-searched person, and hence, like ma'am mentioned, probably from an Article 14 perspective, it may not really stick in because unequals are being treated equally. The deeming provision is being made applicable for non-search persons as well as the search persons. We all are aware. So to give you an example, there is a search on me, and I am a shareholder of Reliance. So because I am a shareholder of Reliance, I received the annual report. So does this mean that there is deemed escapement of Reliance and all the notices will automatically be sent to Reliance, so as to put me and Reliance under the same basket? That cannot be the intent of law. So again, it could be a deeming, it is a deeming provision, but again, it should be a rebuttable presumption so as to state that this is only the starting and the trigger point, and certain investigation into the material so as to substantiate certain level of escapement of income is today important as well. And the inherent difference between searched and non-searched parties should always remain. Under the old law, we have seen where the be it block assessment under the old regime of be it 153A and 153C, we have always seen that there's been an inherent difference. The language of 153A was always different from the language of 153C. Recording of satisfaction note, so as to show that it has a bearing on the total income, was important under 153C, but those words were missing under 153A. So the legislature has always kept the two baskets differently. Now, the very fact that now under the new regime they have been put under the same explanation, can it be said that that distinction has been completely done away with? So we can have this argument on both sides, and this issue is already pending in court as well, as to what exactly would be the impact of explanation 2 on non-search entities. Then these are just some old case laws, or recent case laws, but they talk about the old regime and how there was always an inherent distinction between the two. So 153C, assumption of jurisdiction, was permitted only when we could show from the records, and the courts have of course interpreted saying it has to be assessment year wise. So you have material of incriminating character nature, so as to show that yes, a certain amount of income has escaped assessment, and hence it would have a bearing on my total income. Whereas these words were never there in 153A regime, even if we talk about the old regime. Of course, now talking about incriminating material as a concept, it is still relevant. Now we all know that change of opinion came from Kelvinator Supreme Court. It was a judgment law. It was never, change of opinion was never part of the statute. Similarly, incriminating material for searched and non-searched persons is also a judgment law because it has come from jurisprudence and the judicial precedence over a period of time. And for 153A as well as 153C under the old law, there has eventually been a quietus to this entire debate, and the courts have said that yes, incriminating material is of paramount consideration. So whether that incriminating material will still hold importance in today's law because of the deeming provision itself is another one of the disputed issues which will arise and be of a lot of litigation, I'm sure, in the next few years. This was another recent judgment where the court sees that yes, the procedure of assessment is very demanding, and once a notice is received to the assessee, then the assessee has to go through the entire process till the assessment is finalized. The court says that a sword appears on the head of the assessee the moment a notice is issued, and the sword cannot be invoked in a very light manner except for being able to meet the thresholds which are stated in law. So these are inherent differences that the judiciary has always recognized. Now an important question, like I mentioned, is whether these are done away with or they will still apply is of some relevance and under the new law as well. One of the last points I want to speak about is 149(1)(b). So we have all been talking about the monetary threshold of 50 lakhs, but what we are all missing is that the words are likely to amount to 50 lakhs or more. So the legislature has consciously used the word likely to amount to 50 lakhs or more. They haven't put it in an objective exercise to say 50 lakhs or more. That means if 49 lakhs 50,000, I can say it is less than 50. What exactly do we mean by 50 lakhs or more? So the legislature consciously uses the expression likely, bearing in mind that this is a certain provisional character and probably all the information and material is not available right now, so as to do a determinative exercise whether it will amount to 50 lakhs or more or not. Because this is an important monetary criteria, so as to assume jurisdiction in the larger period. So from the 4th year till the 10th year, you need to cross likely. So for those additional 6-7 years that we are talking about, the monetary threshold will always be likely to exceed 50 lakhs. So most of this word likely becomes very important. We had a similar provision under the proviso of 153A, which is the 4th proviso, which also talks about giving power to issue notices for additional years, where the same terminology is used, likely to exceed 50 lakhs rupees more or not. So the court very recently interpreted the word likely to exceed at that stage of, as well, and the court said that yes, it is not a determinative exercise at the very threshold, but yet the assessing officer needs to record in the satisfaction note that yes, it is likely to exceed 50 lakhs, and only then can he assume jurisdiction. So the court says that it cannot be an ipso facto issuance of notice just because he feels it is of 50 lakhs, but he needs to meet it in the satisfaction note and then assume jurisdiction. So it cannot be on basis of mere speculation and conjecture, but he needs to have certain concrete evidence to say that today I have 30 lakhs, but I have certain information with me to show that eventually this is likely to cross 50 lakhs, and hence I am assuming jurisdiction on account of the monetary threshold being crossed. So how eventually will the word likely play out to determine the monetary threshold is also one of the important aspects. The last topic I want to talk about is the first proviso to 149. Now, of course, this has been subject matter of a lot of debate, and the second round of litigation post Ashish Agarwal is going on. But I'm talking about a different issue and not the issue which was undergoing on account of notices issued pursuant to Ashish Agarwal. The issue out here now is that 153A and 153C timelines were not included when this provision was brought about in the Finance Act 2021. They only said that if a notice could not be issued under the old regime of 148, then it cannot be issued under the new regime of 148. However, at that point of time, there was no reference to the sunset clauses in terms of time limitation of 153A and 153C. This has been brought about by Finance Act 2022 with a retrospective effect. So this now effectively means that if something, so let's say for a third person, a 153C person, if something was time barred under the old law, then it is also time barred under the new law, and the assessee, the third person, will get the benefit of that as well. Now, how to calculate and commute the 10-year or the 7-year or the 6-year period of 153C person has always been subject matter of litigation as well. The proviso to 153C stated that the date of handing documents. So if there's a search on somebody on 1st April 2020, but the documents are handed over in the case of the other person only on 1st April 2024, which is showing a gap of exact 4 years. Then for the 153C person, the assumption of jurisdiction is only on 1/4/2024 and the 10 years are calculated backwards. But if we take it from 1st April 2020, then the 10 years are calculated backwards from that. So that gives a gap of 4 years. So what happens to those 4 years for the 153C person has been subject matter of litigation in court as well. While the assessees always argue that it is 1/4/2024, the revenue argues that it is 1/4/2020 and the date of assuming jurisdiction for the search person and the non-search person always remains the same. This matter has been to some extent settled by the Supreme Court, but the litigation this is still continuing. So how the proviso and the time limitations are decided under the old law will have a very direct impact on how this proviso will apply under the new law. Because if something is time barred as per the old law, then this applies. So how to determine the time barring issues of the old law still hold good for the purposes of adjudication of our time limitations, because ultimately the 10-year period will have a backward calculation from the dates that we are looking at. So again, this is also one of the issues which is pending consideration in court. But it is interesting to see that how these issues will eventually plan out in the next couple of years. We all understand that whenever there's change of law, there are bound to be certain teething issues. But the question that now arises is that these are no longer teething issues. These are issues which are likely to reach courts and create some amount of litigation in the next few years, and eventually they will settle down, because this is what happened under the old law as well. There used to be a lot of issues, and then largely most of those issues did settle down in terms of different judgments coming in. The last issue that I want to talk about is the proviso of the old law and the proviso of the new law. Because under the old law, we all remember the original assessment was under 143(3), then the proviso said that unless there is failure to disclose on behalf of the assessee, the period is of 4 years and not of 6 years. So now if I have to calculate what was the time barring last date under the old law, then do I look at 4 years or do I look at 6 years? And if I look at 4 years, then how does that interplay with the new law? Again, this is one of the issues pending in court, and it is interesting to see how this will arise, because a lot of assessees, MNCs, large companies have a regular scrutiny assessment every year. They undergo 143(3) every year. So whether their timeline under the old law was 4 years or 6 years will have a crucial determination on what is the time limit for them to be issued a notice under the new law. Thank you.